I think Iran is going to be seen by future historians as the moment when it became clear to the whole world that the US is not the dominant power that it projects itself to be, and that it is really unable even to meet the requirements of its allies. And remember, the fundamental requirement it was meeting was in terms of the military umbrella and the protection, the security that it provided. And in return for that, it had the advantage of dollars of, seigniorage. It had the advantage of lots of economic control. It had the advantage of being able to spend huge amounts on its fiscal deficit that the rest of the world paid for. Once the world realizes that that power is much less than they thought, and remember, the US share of global exports is now 10%, its share of global imports is only about 14%, then in fact, this is the beginning of a process where countries are not going to necessarily have that same attitude to the US. This is not something that will happen overnight. It's not going to be tomorrow or next year, but you will see over the next few years, maybe in a decade or two, that the world economy has moved on. I think we have to see BRICS as a grouping. It's not an organization. It's not even like the G7 in the same way. It is a grouping of countries. Sometimes they are very different. They have completely different interests. Some of those countries were at war with each other just, 2 weeks ago. So I think we have to recognize that the BRICS countries came together as a response. The original four came about because an American economist said that they are, or perhaps a British economist said that they are likely to be growing the most in the 21st century. They added South Africa. Now they've added others who are dominantly resource and mineral exporters. Now, the point about that combination is that you get kind of resilience. You are going to trade a lot with each other necessarily, and you have an option to trade more. So you can develop your own trading arrangements. You can develop your own financial arrangements, which are not necessarily transformative, but they make a difference at the margin. They add to your resilience to shocks. And I think that's a very important reason for the BRICS to exist. Because they exist, they can then become the kernel of a different way of doing things. Unfortunately, many of the BRICS countries have terrible governments. We also have to recognize that. And so it doesn't mean that what they're doing is necessarily in the interests of their own people or necessarily progressive. But within the global context and in terms of the global currency hierarchies, the global power relationships, because they are together, they certainly are a more powerful bloc than they would be alone. I should also add that the BRICS would not exist without China, just like G7 would not exist without the US or the EU would not exist without Germany. We have more wars, we have more instability, we have more self-interest, and we have complete disregard now for nature, the environment, the planet. At least we talked about it, at least we tried before. Now it's like all of that has been thrown away and everybody is just doing whatever they want for the short term. To recover that, we actually have to bring people in all our countries to recognize the urgent need to do these things. And for that, it means our elites have to relate more to our people. At the moment, we have globalized elites who relate to each other. We have to have elites that relate to their own people and are seeing what they can do to improve people's resilience, to improve people's lives. And that requires a significant change in the politics in our countries. So I'm just hoping that that politics does come about, that new politics in which the elites, the large businesses and the governments recognize that they have to meet the needs of their people, that comes about sooner. Because let's face it, otherwise humanity is really on a precipice. We could actually it could go either direction. We could really end up in a very, very dystopian situation. I believe that today we have the greatest concentration of wealth and power that we have had in human history. Because earlier there were people powerful in particular countries. Now they are global. We have a handful of people, maybe 10, 12 billionaires, multi-billionaires and one trillionaire who control most of the finance, most of the productive facilities. They control, one man controls half of the satellites going around the earth. That same man could, on a whim, decide to buy up what was, in fact, a sort of public platform, which should be a public utility, and then buy it up, change its name, and change it as he wishes and pleases. He and a few other men have the power to make their companies bring about AI that will be massively labor displacing, to use AI for weaponry in ways that we still don't fully understand what the impact is, to instigate wars because it suits their own profitability, to prevent people from accessing essential medicines because that also prevents their own profitability. So we have led to such extraordinary concentrations of wealth that bring about the power of very few individuals and the corporations they control to influence governments, to influence institutions, laws, regulations, and policies. We have to bring that to an end, and we can. It is possible to control all of this, and we have to. It's extremely interesting how much traction the idea of a wealth tax has now. Because 10 years ago, you mention it and people would roll their eyes and say it's impossible. Today, 95% of French people support it. And the French are very conservative. 95% of them support it. It was brought to the assembly, it lost very narrowly because, many of the politicians are controlled by wealthy people. But it's coming back again. It will not go away because people are demanding of their elected officials that you have to do something about this in France. In Denmark, the government has announced that they are going to bring in a wealth tax. In California, there is a plan to tax 5% of the wealth of the billionaires. And so I think there is a lot of traction on this.